Hello and welcome to the Artellectuals podcast. On today's episode, we have Aleksandr Karjaka. He is a photographer and a clarinetist. The subjects of his photography include portraiture and commercial photography for brands like Yamaha and Scholastic. He is also a professional clarinetist, and he has performed at places like Carnegie Hall and the Metropolitan Opera House in New York City. He also teaches fashion photography at the Parson School of Design, the new school. In today's episode, I spoke to Aleksandr about the steps he took to stand out in his career and advance in the photography world. You can find more information about Aleksandr on his website at karjaka.com, Karjaka.com. Before we continue with today's episode, I would greatly appreciate it if you can like and subscribe to if you're watching us on YouTube, or if you're listening to us on Apple Podcasts, please leave us a review. And that would be such a big help for us and bring more supporters in so we can continue doing this. Thank you so much. Now, without any delay, I present to you today's episode with Aleksandr Karjaka. Cool. Well, thank you so much for joining me, Aleksandr.
Thank you.
Yeah, and I appreciate that you're getting on. And how's everything going for you?
Oh my gosh. Well, it's if you can, I can't believe that we're coming up on July. It feels like with COVID and everything that's going on in the world that it's just like, it feels like my mind is still in February, if that makes any sense, when we just started hearing about all this. And, even though like a lot of us have had, time off, for me, it's, I haven't really stopped. It's just been, pivoting, shifting, focusing on different ways of, advertising music and photography and expanding in the meantime. It's nice to actually get a chance to kind of catch up, but also just like I wouldn't say it's been a vacation, as some of my colleagues have mentioned. So.
Right. Well, what are you involved in music-wise?
I sub off Broadway. I'm a professional clarinetist. Let me go with that first. I have music ed undergrad. I have a master's degree from Bowling Green State in Ohio, and I went for additional study in Manhattan School. And I've subbed all around the world. I've been on tour with a bunch of groups. I've gotten to play at the Met a couple times.
Cool. Good to hear that you've been subbing with them. That's a pretty awesome experience.
Yeah, it's right now we're all like, I was out with some friends over the weekend. They're like, so when is everything coming back? When are all these concerts and opportunities coming back? And it turned in. We were just like, we're kind of just winging it, trying to figure it out.
Awesome. Well, good. Glad that you're staying up to date on things. And how are you keeping busy during this time?
I'm definitely doing well with the photography. At least I'm doing more marketing. Like I've kind of revamped the website, new marketing materials to send out to different organizations, art directors. And then in the meantime, also like I focused a lot on, I have a magazine. If you go to karjaka.com/magazine, you'll see a lot of, I feature a lot of different artists, musicians, entrepreneurs. It's all about expansion. So I've been able to spend more time designing and just really understanding, like as a portrait photographer, and as a musician, like I'm fascinated by people. And so what the magazine does to a certain extent is highlight those different people and get a little bit insight into their story or who they are, what they're up to. Like eventually, like I'm sure I'll highlight you in the magazine and everything that you've got going on.
That would be great.
Yeah, you're welcome. Absolutely. So, and on top of it, like, if you can believe it, like I have 30 in my living room, I have about 35 different varieties of grapefruit and lemon trees that I've grown from seeds, because I'm like, I got to keep my mind active to a certain extent. I tricked my seeds into germinating early in the middle of March. And then 2.5 months later, we get these little guys. But I have I have different sizes, but I have about 35 of these just under heat lamps. And
wow, that's a cool project.
Well,
that's great.
How often, and that's the thing, it's like, when else are you going to do this, right? It's like, I used to do a lot of horticulture in my teens. I had a landscaping construction business for about 12 years. So I miss, like in New York, there's no, having a garden, let alone like a yard, is a luxury. So it's just a matter of like, okay, I can kind of dive back into, horticulture and botany from my years past.
Sure. Yeah, now you have new subjects to feature when I see you posting up something, so that's awesome.
It's all about creating quality content. Like at the end of the day, it's like, I have my studio page, which is all like portraits and fashion and everything like photography and art, and then I have my personal page on Instagram that kind of features these guys or still lifes or stuff that's not just like, oh, this is interesting, let's take a photograph of that. And then it turns into like quality content where half the time people are more interested in like you, the person, so they see that stuff and they go, oh, I can relate to that rather than some fashion model.
Sure. Cool. Well, I'm curious, what kind of gear do you use to shoot? I know you probably have a lot of different gear, but are you a Canon guy, a Nikon guy, a Leica guy?
Well, exactly. Well, I mean, it's interesting. For years, I used to shoot like when I got started out here, I was shooting a lot of the Nikon. Like I grew up shooting film, and with a Nikon F. And when I came over and moved to digital, when I moved to New York about a decade ago, I switched over to a bunch of Nikons, and then as I switched, I'd done like 300 weddings and a bunch of I
Wow.
basically leveraged the music market into building a photography career. And in doing so, I realized I wanted to be in the studio more. So I bought a Hasselblad 4 years ago. I actually just sold it
Wow.
recently.
That's a
Yeah.
big deal, right? That's a big deal camera.
Well, the
That's
Hasselblad, it was like 36,000, 50 megapixels, like state of the art. And so for years I was shooting on that. And then I moved over to phase one. I've been shooting a lot with phase one. And when I'm on the street, when you see me on the street, or if I'm going to an event or something, I'm just carrying around a Leica, the M10, which I adore. I've actually shot a couple concerts with it, theater events, which is super quiet, inconspicuous.
That's
You're able to
awesome.
capture some great moments without being bulky rigged.
What do you think of the? I'm now using a mirrorless camera. Have you
Mhm.
been experimenting with those at all?
So I've shot a lot with, I've done a lot of testing and a lot of shooting with Fuji and Sony. And, the Sony, the AR2, the AR3, they're, I mean, great cameras. I like the Zeiss lenses that work on them. Honestly, though, the ergonomics are great, but I don't like the menu. Like if you're trying to manipulate the menu, it's very difficult. That's just a
Mm,
huge turnoff for me.
right.
And for years I used to shoot these little, I would rent from PhotoCare here in Manhattan, Fuji's if I was doing a concert. But the thing, to get back to your point, the thing is with mirrorless, it's with mirrorless, you usually get a digital viewfinder. And for me as an optics kind of guy, it's it just looks weird. It's like my eye and after shooting film.
Great. Well, yeah, it'd be great to know a little bit more about you. Where
Sure.
you mentioned you went to school in Ohio. You said.
I did my first master's out in Bowling Green, Ohio, which is just
Okay.
10 miles outside of Toledo.
Oh, nice.
Yeah. So I'm Midwest born and bred. I'm from Chicago. Spent my teens in Indiana before going to Michigan State for music ed, and I studied clarinet out there. Started subbing around, and then made my way over to Ohio. And it was kind of during that time I started spending also I've been doing photography. I'm 35 years old, but I've been a photographer over I've been playing around with cameras since I was 8, but I've been a professional about 20 some years. And same
Hmm.
thing with kind of clarinet. Not long after picking up a camera, clarinet came along, and then I just kind of got immersed in all this kind of art forms and whatnot. So when I came out to New York, I was at Manhattan School for I was in classes for one semester before withdrawing, and then I kind of audited classes a second semester over MSM.
Hmm.
And for I didn't like the idea of getting a second master's is just ridiculous. But the reason I went for a second master's was I knew I'm not one of those people that can just go to a new city and just put up my flag and say, hey, I'm here, bring on the work. I'm a big networker. So
Hmm.
my whole thought process was by studying with Michael Lowenstern at Michigan State, at Manhattan School. Not only am I getting a fabulous education by one of the world's greatest bass clarinetists, but I'm also like getting to network, build communities, and like kind of build my network for New York. And so I did a lot of that while I was there, but since I withdrew from school there, it got shortened a little bit. But that's how kind of like, so I started subbing at more gigs and places and playing off Broadway and all these little like recording sessions for various groups and whatnot. But I also was like, I'm from Chicago, and I thought Chicago was expensive. And then you come to New York and you're like,
Oh yeah.
you have you have no idea what, like, wait, I'm sorry, what, like, I'm paying what, like, I was getting great deals on rent for a while, and I thought it was just like, I'm paying $1,200 in rent, or I'm paying $1,500 in rent. People are like, that's expensive. And I'm like, yeah, but I hear like it got me real, like, when you move out to New York, you kind of have to start thinking like outside of the classroom, because I'd been in school almost 8 years. So it's like I'd known, like, okay, I go to class, I practice, I go home, like in some form of, and eat at some point, like throughout all that. And then when you get here, as you know, it's like I have to sustain all this. How am I gonna make money? And you start quickly realizing that it's like I started working freelance for Pure Music in Midtown. I started doing some other like kind of part-time freelance gigs, doing design work. But it turns into basically how can I cobble enough to get to the next month, and then the next month. And that's where, like, I sold my Honda Accord back at my parents' place in Indiana, and started buying up Nikon equipment pretty quick. And then here's the, like, I teach at Parson School of Design here in photography, right?
Oh,
and awesome. I tell my students this, because they're like, I don't know where to go or how to get started. And I don't have any degrees in photography. Like, I studied with a bunch of different photographers. My father, being a filmmaker, gave me like the eye of just like, Aleks, my son, what do you see? We'd be in the park, like, kind of framing stuff. And we started talking about, like, at school, like, I started telling my students, I'm like, look, how I got into wedding photography was I went on Google and I Googled wedding photographers in New York, and you get that 400 million photographers like in 400 seconds of, like, milliseconds.
Right.
I started just emailing, cold emailing, like, the first 20 people that came up, right? And I'm like, hey, my name's Aleks. I'm starting out here, building my network in photography. Shoot Nikon. I don't really have much of a portfolio. Most of my portfolio at the time was film, because that's all I'd shot. I shot, 35 millimeter and just rolls of film back in Chicago. And so I got 15 no responses. A couple of people, will put your name on file if we ever need you. One woman called me up and said, how dare you call me? Like, she called me up to ream me about, like, emailing her, and then asked me what my credentials were. And I was just like, I don't understand what's going on here. And, like, you're reaming me out for, like, so I'm like, is this photography in New York? Is this how this works? And then number 19, this woman named Autumn Lynn interviewed me. I brought a music resume to a photography interview, which is like, she didn't even look at. And at the end, she's like, did you bring a resume? She's like, what's on it if you're in the music? I'm like, oh, it's music. I mean, it's all these different musicals and shows in Chicago. She's like, nice.
Nice, yeah.
So I apprenticed with her for a couple years doing wedding and events, and then started shooting Carnegie through that, and started shooting at MSM, and started, kind of riding the wave of social media and Instagram. Like, and it's bananas, because it's like the Instagram and the market that is today is so saturated compared even in like 2011, when I really kind of got rolling with all this, where it's like, there's so much noise, to quote Alex Ross, right? It's like, like, my whole thing was like, I was lucky enough to kind of keep building an audience throughout all that, whether it was like music gigs or photography gigs, or like I'm a copywriter for a lot of different groups and like companies. So it's like, wherever, like, you have to wear, as like with this podcast, like, you have to wear different hats.
Oh yeah.
The idea is like, you're a beautiful cellist, wonderful human being, and on top of it, now you are. I mean, you're an interviewer. We're sitting down doing this in the middle of a pandemic. Like, who knew?
Mm-hmm. Right. Life takes us to interesting places for sure, and yeah, that's interesting. So you've done a lot of wedding photography. So you worked through a lot. Have you worked with multiple wedding vendors? Is that something that, or was it specifically that one vendor that really gave you that access?
So what happened was I worked through, like, I've shot a little under like 300 weddings, if you can believe it, in the last, like, my days of weddings are few and far between, where friends will be like, hey, we want you to shoot the wedding. And they're like, I'll do you a favor and come in. But I'm not like, I don't advertise it anymore. Like, it's the same kind of principle with like shooting a wedding versus playing clarinet with an ensemble or a group, where it turns into like, you're meeting different, like who's contracting for the gig, or the contractor, or the venue, or are you trying to get on their short list, or like how do, like, it's that kind of whole networking thing. So I got, with my portfolio, I gotten onto a bunch of like, different country clubs or different groups and whatnot. But the beautiful thing, at least with photography, like being in an ensemble, it's like, if you're connected with somebody, like, for example, as a clarinetist, like I would get calls from like other contractors, or I'd be in small chamber groups who are like, we're going to play a wedding next weekend. Like, giddy up. I don't have to do anything. I just need to show up, I play, I walk out. The same thing kind of works with photography when you're a second shooter, or if you're an assistant, where you're just like, you want me to stand right here and photograph right here? Great. And all right, bride's coming down this way, I'm going to shoot right that way, but when you're shooting, like, when you're doing, I mean, there isn't as much cash, obviously, when you're just second shooting, or right, when you're being contracted through a third party, as opposed to going right to the source, or being the primary photographer, or like if you're contracting your group, gig for your ensemble, you're probably going to make, however much more, just a little bit more than the rest of your, because you're doing all the producing, the heavy lifting,
Yeah, it's true that there is a lot of behind the scenes stuff. I mean, being a second shooter, like you mentioned, you are getting the work directly given to you in a way. Like you decide, okay, I'm going to take this gig, but
yeah,
if you're the owner, you have to funnel in traffic, and that has its own can of worms. So it's awesome that you've been involved in that. Cool. So yeah, it'd be great to go on to. So how much of involvement now do you have with the clarinet? Like, are you still performing often? I mean, I know with this situation, pandemic-wise, we don't have anything going on. Maybe we have some chamber groups things, but are you still practicing? How's that going?
Oh yeah, I mean, I practice every day. I still my specialty is bass clarinet. That's where like I get to really shine. And so I still do recording sessions, or like in the tri-state area, and then I fly back to Chicago for recording sessions. And then
sure, it's interesting that you
I was
mentioned
never
that,
like being a soloist was never really kind of a focus of mine.
I
like
still
being
play, you can still practice,
like,
and
I love being
how that will impact other aspects
recording
of life.
session
In a way,
in the studio,
like I was
that's
talking
deal.
about just now about
So
pre-college.
for me right now, it's just like I'm
I'm
doing like everybody in practice.
Actually, I did a bunch of
pre-college,
pre-colleges, but yeah, Juilliard was the last one, long time
all that stuff.
ago.
I
And
spent about 2 hours.
no, but like a lot of musicians that
it's kind of
were there at that time, they grew up to be something different. They grew up to be a doctor, or some
exactly.
sort of artistic. Something else in artistic.
That's the whole
world.
thing. It's just
so
like
it's interesting how
you can. It's real easy to have that kind of summer mentality if you're not
provide them
playing
with
at a
a
festival or
discipline.
something. Just to be like, okay, now I'm going to do nothing on the horn. I'm just going to I'm going to recover, and I don't know. When you've been doing it, like it's like that old Pablo Casals. It's that old Casals quote. It's just like, why do you still practice scales? And it's like, because I still have something to learn. I don't feel like I've gotten all of it in. It's like, and that's kind of been my philosophy since undergrad. Basically, there's always something to learn, and I'm fascinated with music. And the interesting thing about me, not about me, but about practicing, which is not surprising, is that all kind of permeates that discipline, that Zen permeates into photography. It permeates into all art forms, like regardless of what I play, but like what you play, what you're doing here, and like all that stuff. It doesn't, it's easy to think that like, okay, I practiced for 2 hours, but that practice lingers. Like that time, like the way your brain is wired through all that, it's like, okay, like I see how when I'm producing photo shoots, or when I'm editing photos, or when I'm spending time like working on bigger projects, how that kind of discipline and focus really it's transparent everywhere. It really kind of permeates, like osmosis, if you will, through everything that we do. And that's I it wasn't really till I got to my master's in like at Bowling Green with Kevin Schempf that I really kind of Kevin's this kind of
Mm-hmm.
Zen master when it comes to clarinet. So it wasn't like that. Technique was always very important, but it was also like approaching. It's like your approach and like no different than your practice, no different than like your preparation. Like my father's big on preparation, the same kind of deal where it's like that kind of focus is
Mm-hmm.
almost more important than actually playing clarinet, taking a photograph, coming up with interview notes and whatnot, because then it gives you the space to create and just kind of be in the moment, as opposed to I have this thing that I need to do right now. I have to do this. And so with having COVID here, like again, I mean, it's awful what's happening with the world with throughout all this, but it's also given us great like humility to kind of, as artists, to kind of understand what we're doing with our music and our practice and our everyday lives. And it's like, I mean, in New York here, right now it's looking like, I mean, we won't see any kind of new
Mm-hmm.
work or really even live venue work till next year. So it's a matter of, I mean, and it's easy, as you probably know, like, and with everybody that you've interviewed, like, to become disillusioned or like depressed or like, am I gonna, like, I have friends who are like, I'm not gonna do music anymore. I'm like, great, like, there's still plenty of life out there. But this, and like, and people change their minds, but it's the practice. Getting back to your thing about practice, that's kind of, it's a very grounding thing. Excuse me, every day where you get to spend time like this is home, like whatever's going on in the world, like happening, like, or whatever thoughts, like you get to clear that. And like I
Mm-hmm.
can feel my clarinet without my clarinet in my hands, as you
Yeah,
can
it's
feel like the
interesting.
string, you can feel
Yeah,
your
I know
bow, you can
someone
feel the
actually
strings, like
who
there's something
was
beautiful in
Juilliard
knowing that
for their
consistency is
undergrad, I
there.
think, and then they
That it's just
decided,
like,
okay, I'm gonna just
that's
switch
kind of like, even my
trajectory,
heart
and
gets
they
like a
became an
little
actress.
excited
So
talking
it's
about it,
like,
because it's like that's
so
always
it's interesting.
home.
We
Like
can,
that's
we're
like,
not
the
limited.
house could be on
People
fire,
just think, oh, I
but
should
know
just
what the
do what
cello
I've
feels like,
been
what the
doing.
clarinet feels
And I
like.
hear, and I do
That
hear
it's
some
just
people
like,
who are like that,
even
and it
if
is
it's just
upsetting
five, like
because they don't,
my whole
they
thing is,
think that
and
they're
I tell
stuck.
this
Maybe they're too
with my
old,
students
or
across
they
the board.
got
It's
their
like,
feet too deep in the water.
whether
So,
whether you're playing
I feel like it's
clarinet
also
or taking a
important to
photograph,
also
just,
mention
I mean,
that
just
they
5 minutes a
should
day, even
consider that
just to
it is
feel like
possible
that
to do
kind of
something else,
home, that kind of like
and they
grounding,
shouldn't
if
just
you
lock
will.
their mind. I think that's
It's
important as
amazing
well
what your
because in
mind
a
will
way,
like
sometimes
grasp
musicians need a
onto,
break
and
too.
like
They
call.
need
It's like
to
meditation, to a certain extent.
find inspiration in other things. So it's great that you've been able to do that also in regards to photography and clarinet, and merging the two together and finding creative outlets that way too. So it's very cool. What are some of the highlights of your
Ah,
career, whether it was
hmm
performing or it was photography, people you've met, any specific kind of instance that really stood out to you?
hmm Oh yeah, like when I was at Michigan State, like I had friends that would get through like junior year or the end of their sophomore year and be like, music, this has been great, but I'm gonna run. I'm gonna cut and run. I'm gonna cut my losses. And we'd still hang out with all these friends that had like
Awesome.
essentially quit or walked away from music. And number one thing, always like, and I remember this as clear as a bell, is like other schools within the university or even in the real world love musicians, because musicians were wired differently. Like the way, like, think about it, like even like you're talking about multiple preschools, like preschools, pre-colleges, like the idea, like
Mm-hmm.
at at 13, 14, like I decided I was going to go into music. Like the average,
Absolutely.
like the average junior in high school
Yeah.
is
How did
still
you
kind
land
of
those, by
piecing
the way?
it
I'm just
together,
curious.
right?
Like, I didn't know that you've
So we're
done
like
things for
freshmen,
Amazon
sophomores in high school,
and
kind of going, okay,
New York City Ballet and things
this
like
is the
that. So, like,
career path that
how
I want to go
how did you
to. I
get
need to
involved in
study with
that?
all these people. I need to have these accolades. I need to get this scholarship. I need this instrument. We're doing it well beyond any accountant going, you know what? I'm going to spend a year to 2 years just exploring college, exploring my life, and doing all this stuff. It's like, explore what exploring? Exploring was, I was 12. It's like, we don't have the luxury because it's a full commitment. And if you're like a string player, like as a clarinetist, like I started playing clarinet at 10, but if you're starting Suzuki like early, like, all right, so you're, 5 years old, 4 years old, kind of going at it, or like, you know, you're exposed from a very, like if you're playing piano at a very young age, like, and you decide this is your drug of choice, like your way of life, like you're committed. And then if you decide halfway through college, like, I don't want to do this anymore, like, I have friends that are making more in finance like than they were as concert pianists because they're the way their brain thinks and the way, the chemistry of their education is concerned just provided so many different opportunities. And the big thing with all this, I mean, and I have that as a photographer, right? Like the way when people I hate, like, and one of my big pet peeves about musicians especially is like they'll play a gig, but they won't do the most important thing after that gig, which is like go mingle, or even if it's like 5 minutes, like, or talk to a donor, talk to other people, like,
It's a good point. Wow.
give out your business card. If you don't have a business card, you go and get one from Vistaprint or whatever, like, or at least like connect with people on like an Instagram or Twitter or whatever your mode of choice is, because at the end of the day, it's like those people, like, yeah, you've got a conductor or you've got some contractor that's brought you into the gig, that's all real great, but those other people that are listening to you, that are like after, like in the hallway, those people want to talk to you because they can't do what you do because you're brilliant at what instrument you play. And more importantly, those people are going to be like, you know what, we have this other gig, or my sister's cousin's teaching, like, it's got a kid that's playing violin for the first time, or blah, blah, blah. Or like in my case, it's like it turned into a job in a completely different field. I mean, I could have never predicted that. But that's the beautiful thing about, like, and especially in today's world of all this COVID digital, like, detox that we're about to unleash into the world. It's just like the idea of meeting people is even more important in today's world, because you get the human interaction, which I'm like, this is great that you and I get to spend time here, but like, I'm not kidding, like, we should still do that beer or coffee, like in person.
Oh yeah.
Yeah,
Absolutely. I would actually like to do a follow-up with people that I'm interviewing, just because it'd be nice to just get a behind-the-scenes view of what they do for work. Like,
absolutely.
like follow someone, half a day, and just would be such a cool insight, I think. That's what I wanted to do originally a little bit, was just to have, like, I don't know, get a luthier and just show a little bit of day in their life. I mean, that's been done before, but also having that podcast portion where you could actually really get to know that person. So yeah, I would love to do that.
Absolutely. Well, and here's the thing, to follow up with that, it's just like all this stuff, like I have a lot of students that all tell me the same thing. It's like, oh, that's been done before. And it's just like, yeah, but you haven't done it like that. Like,
right.
I specialize in people. There are hundreds of thousands of portrait photographers in the world. And I still get, I'm very, like, knock on wood, I'm very thankful that I can travel and do things. But the way I take portraits, the way you would set up behind the scenes, or like how you'd edit it, or like the vision that you'd have to create that, like nobody, like, you're the delta change, like you're the only person that could do that through your lens of life. So it's like, I'm excited for you to do that, because I want to see more of that. Like, I want to see that in the world where, like, I can connect, and then, like, you never know, like, somebody's going to see that and be inspired, and like, and I hate to use the word inspired because I think it's overrated. Everybody's just like, have you inspired anybody today? Like, I don't think we walk around going, I'm inspiring people by wearing this jacket, or I'm inspiring people by taking a photograph. Like, if they are inspired, that's great, and I love it, don't get me wrong. But I don't think that's our main purpose. It's just like, to create art through a lens and have an impact. I think that's more important, rather than going around like purposefully, like, with that. That's a side tangent. But all this to say is, like, I love the fact that it's like, yeah, it's been done before, but giddy up, let's try it anyway, right?
Awesome. Well, yeah, I totally agree with that. And I was wondering, so, like, we already covered, pandemic and things like that. Do you have any specific words? I know you've mentioned already quite a few things, but any words of wisdom for aspiring artists who maybe want to pursue any art generally?
Well, in case people haven't seen the whole Ira Glass thing about, like, it, and I show this with my students in every art form. It's just like, and I'm in that same boat. It's like, if you can believe it, like I take good photographs and I play good clarinet, but I'm not happy with any of it, to be honest. Like I hate it. Like I've been doing clarinet 20 years. You think I could play a D correctly, but I still hear there's room for improvement. Or like I look at the photographs that I've taken of people and like I might be happy in that moment or something like that, but then you spend more time looking at it and evaluating because your taste is getting better. And you know that it's just like you're raising the bar on yourself. Now, where I've noticed even with myself to a certain extent is that you have to let the process, you have to go through the process. And at the end of the day, it's just like don't stop in the middle of the process. Like you can't, the whole thing, don't switch horses in the middle of a stream. Like get to the other side. Like stay in it. Like
People too worry about the perfection, I think, as well. There is a process in learning. It's the same thing with podcasts or YouTube or Instagram or anything. When you put work out there, you're not gonna.
get it
People
out.
want to see you get better. You're not gonna be at the top right away. But where will you go?
Well, and that's the journey is sometimes like in my mind to a certain extent. I think the journey is more exciting than the final product. Like you're talking about behind the scenes photos or videos or like behind the scenes in a day in the life. It's like I can do a lot of this kind of work, but it gets to a point where people become like nose deaf. They're like, quality product here, quality, like whether it's like a recording or a photograph or like it's beautiful, 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 but to see that raw, that sometimes has a more impact, like a larger impact. Or like I came from a family of like my parents would go to jobs, they'd master the job in like a year and a half, and then when things got boring, they'd move on to the next job. They'd go and like kind of audition. They'd go and move forward. And the idea is like we're learning human beings. It's like the mind is either going like expanding or it's contracting. So the idea there's no stagnation. So it's just like if you're not failing, but you're not moving forward, you're just kind of regressing. It's just like on autopilot. Like I know it's like like my friends or musicians say like I don't practice scales anymore. I'm like, how are you developing as a human? Like I don't understand how that works. Like, well, I get to learn a lot on the gig, and that's absolutely true. And sometimes you just don't have that. Like, but I still, it's like you still like the minutia of the practicing or the failing or however you want to look at it. It still makes like an expanding universe for how we operate, how we make art, how we develop as humans. And so again, to quote Gary Vaynerchuk, I'm a huge fan of failing because I seem to be doing it a lot these days on top of it.
Mm-hmm. Great. Well, thank you, Aleksandr. Can you plug in your information? I will also mention at the beginning of this episode.
Absolutely.
Great.
So I'm Alex Karjaka. You can my website is karjaka.com. That's karjaka.com. If you have any questions, you want to know more about me, my art, photography, I'm Aleks, that's Aleks at karjaka.com, Karjaka. And my Instagram is Karjaka, just at Karjaka. I'm trying to brand that way. And I do a lot of teaching and lecturing. So if you have any questions, like I'm always here to field anything. And I can't thank you enough so much for having me a part of your podcast, my friend.
Thank you. It has been a real pleasure speaking with you and getting to know you because we haven't actually had a conversation face to face. So
likewise,
I do like that this is the next best thing, and let's keep in touch and let's be
Absolutely.
the flush when this is when it's possible.
I can't wait. Looking forward to it, buddy.
Awesome. Thanks for your time again.
Thank you. Take care.